Welcome to the Success Ascent. My name is Pat Mancuso, and I'm the creator and host of our show. And today we have a very special guest. And I'm going to introduce you to Doug in just a second and share all these great things that he's going to share with us today. I just want you to think ladders. And you're going to get a clue here in just a second. So Doug began working at Little Giant building ladders when he was just 10 years old. And I watched the video and I watched the story, and there's some fun stories in that hopefully we can get into. Growing up with Hal as his father, father gave Doug a foundation of faith, persistence, service, and a love of all things fast, of course. We didn't talk about cars. We're going to have to talk about that, and motorcycles. He used that foundation to help build the brand and lead the sales team at the Little Giant. He has more than 40 years experience in manufacturing, operations, sales leadership, and executive management. Doug carries today on the legacy of Hal in his service to the church, his charity work, and his business ventures. In 2020, he co-founded Boar Investment Group. Boar is involved in real estate rentals and property management. Doug serves on the board of directors of Honoring Heroes Foundation, a charitable organization that helps fallen police officers and their families. Oh my gosh, what an amazing, amazing commitment. He also has served 2 missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Doug, welcome to the show.
Hey, Pat, it's so nice to meet you and be here. I really appreciate this opportunity to be here. It's great. It's awesome. Thank you.
Well, it's our pleasure. And I want to give a shout out to Ken Walls, because you actually were a part of a deal with Ken, and I'm part of Ken's group. And it was just an opportunity to make a connection. So we're blessed to have you here today, and certainly grateful. So, Doug, I always like to have some fun with my guests as we get on, and we do the intro, and that's the intro on paper. Tell us something about Doug that maybe somebody doesn't know, or you wouldn't want somebody to know.
Well, I was thinking about that when you asked me that earlier. And my senior year of high school, I had one friend. He was a little crazy, a little wild and crazy, and he just barely passed away, which is really, really sad. But we our last day of school, he said, "Hey, let's go to the store and buy some eggs and just plaster people with eggs." And I was a good kid. I didn't really get in a lot of trouble. But so me and him and another friend whose dad was the chief of police where I grew up.
Oh my!
We go and buy eggs, and we're just hitting people with them and everything. And we come around this corner, and I'm driving my car. My buddy Brent's in the front. Our windows are down. It's like May and good weather, and the kid in the back's dad's the chief of police. And we see this guy talking outside of a car in just regular clothes, talking to somebody. My friend throws an egg over, and as he throws it over the car, our buddy in the back goes, "That's a police officer."
Oh, no.
And the egg comes over and hits him right on the side of the face.
No.
It goes all over his clothes and everything. Well, he jumps in his car and pulls us over. And he tells me and Jack in the back, he says, "You guys need to go home." And it was like just barely early too. It was the last night of school. And he takes my friend Brent home. I mean, he takes him home. And anyway, we thought we were going to get in a lot of trouble, but we didn't get any trouble. My parents, I don't think, ever found out about it. But my buddy, whose dad was chief of police, he said, "Oh, everybody teased that guy, and because he had egg on his side of his face and everything." And we didn't. But luckily, like I said, one of my friends' dad was police chief, but we probably could have gotten a lot of trouble, but we didn't.
Well, let's hope the statute of limitations is long gone by now on that one. So.
Oh yeah, and the thing is, they confiscated all the eggs and everything.
Oh,
so
that's funny. That's funny. Well, so I'm getting a sense, Doug, that based upon the little research that we did and listening to your story when you were you and your buddies broke into the manufacturing place and played a little game in there, and there was a little injury. I'm getting the sense that you kind of live on the edge a little bit. That's what I'm starting to hear.
Well, I did have a key because I cleaned the building and everything. But yeah, that was a lot of fun to go in there, and it was probably a couple 100,000 square foot building full of ladders, turn off all the lights, completely pitch black, and then play hide and seek in there. It was a lot of fun.
I love it. So let's go back. So as I did the research, so your dad gets involved with a gentleman, abroad who's got the opportunity to have you all manufacture ladders here, and a very unique ladder, by the way. I mean, it wasn't your ordinary ladder. And so he does that. He takes advantage of that opportunity and builds this amazing organization. So talk a little bit about the organization itself beyond that.
Yeah. So in the very beginning, the other ladder companies actually laughed at my dad and said, "Mr. Wing, you're an idiot. You're going to completely fall on your face." And my dad said that really motivated him to be successful, because here were these giants of the industry and they laughed at him.
Yeah.
And so anyway, yeah, my dad was in a completely different business. He was really, he was crushing it in the life insurance business. Came across this design and brought the idea back to the U.S. and really he created a demonstration. I mean, he was selling a ladder, was probably $300 at the time in the early 70s. Interest rates were high. The economy was terrible.
Yeah.
And he really had to go toe to toe, either house to house or business to business, and then eventually through trade shows and fairs. And they developed this presentation where they would captivate people, do a quick presentation, do a close on them, and then have answers to objections. And they would take orders at these fairs and stuff, write up the orders, tell people you'll get your ladders in 4 to 6 months, but oh, by the way, you need to give us your money now, and then you'll get your ladders. And so that's how the company started. Later on, other distributors would say, "Hey, we want to sell these," and so
Sure.
that came at a later time. But there were a lot of ups and downs, highs and lows in the business. Eventually, our patents ran out. We almost went out of business several times, and then
Wow.
we did a huge infomercial that just changed the whole face of the company and brought big success. And then the company invested in other verticals and really strengthened themselves, because we were kind of a one-trick pony type.
Sure.
Of thing. So there's just a lot of different layers to this, but it started out with my dad and one or two other salesmen, and eventually they would bring in products from Europe and containers, and then eventually they received the rights to build them, and
Yeah.
the rest kind of goes from there. But I think one thing people need to realize is when you build a company, a lot of times people see Little Giant like, "Oh man, this is such a cool company," but this year's the 50-year anniversary of Little Giant. It takes a long time and a lot of hard work to build a big company. Little Giant's got probably 400 or 500 employees now and does several $100 million a year in sales. And it took a long time. It wasn't easy, and it takes a lot of work and effort.
And you said this is what anniversary year?
50th.
50th. That, you think about that. How many companies stay in business nowadays, 50 years or more, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you obviously had to be doing a lot of things right, and the foresight and the risk taking. So I want to dial ahead, because we're going to talk about the book that you wrote, and I know that goes into the journey with your dad and through that process and what y'all learned. But I want to ask you, the Success Ascent is about entrepreneurs and their journey and what they've struggled with, the ceilings they've hit, and the things they've learned. So you ran the company for how long?
So we had a management team of 4 individuals, myself as vice chairman, my brother who was chairman and president of the company, and then Ryan Moss, who is the CEO and is still there, and then our chief financial officer. So gosh, several 10, 15 years, something like that. Yeah, where I was in the direct upper management.
You were leadership, and you were an owner in the company, obviously. And so in that journey of that, what did you learn as a leader, if you may? Like, what did you learn as an entrepreneur?
Well, I think, especially being around, my father, who is an incredible businessman and just an incredible individual, I would say the biggest lesson I learned was that people are your most important asset in any company. My dad used to say, it's not our patents, it's not our products, it's not our buildings. Our most valuable asset in the business is our people. And we need to treat our people like family. We need to take care of them. And my dad was really, really good at picking the right people, putting them in the right place, mentoring them, loving them, helping them, building them. When you think about that, most businesses are just totally the opposite now. They're focused on one thing, the bottom line, the profit.
Right.
their ROI. And Hal Wing taught me, build the people and the rest will come. And it came in droves. I mean, he was so good at just building people, helping people, and mentoring them and loving them. I always tell people, most bosses come through the front door, they walk in, go in their office, close the door.
Yeah.
Do not want to be bothered. My dad went through the back door. And if you think about this, he knew over 400 people by name. He knew something about them. He knew who their kids were, their families, what their hobbies were. That takes a lot of work right there, just to know your people. And when you know people like that and they know you care about them, they will bust their rear ends for you.
Yeah. You know what's interesting, and I just had this thought because, what you're sharing, I mean, it's amazing. And yet I was thinking about if I walked into a Barnes and Noble or went to Amazon and I searched for leadership books, there'd be like hundreds, if not thousands of leadership books on what you just talked about. Mm-hmm. And yet there'd be very few books on bottom line profitability. And yet what you said is so true. Most CEOs focus on bottom line profitability. And I wonder, do they just not read any of these books, right? I mean, it's just like, it was just this aha. So let me ask you this. What was your biggest challenge in your leadership journey?
I would say through a lot of the periods of growth, finding the right people, finding people as we got bigger and, as we go into the time frame that we are now,
right.
Finding people that really wanted to work, and that didn't have the something for nothing mentality. Finding people who had that. And we always had this philosophy at Little Giant that if we can take somebody that has a positive attitude and that's happy and that has a good, strong work ethic, we can teach them what they need to do in the company. And so that's one thing I really learned from my dad is we hire by attitude and work ethic. And of course, when you're talking about finances and things like that, you've got to have somebody who has a degree as your CFO, but really you got to look for people who, number one, have that work ethic. And then number two, they have that attitude where they're happy and they have that great attitude. I think that's really one of the most important things I learned as a businessman, and still in our company that we have now, is we pick people that are just happy and they're work hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I love what you said. So in your journey as a leader, if I had to ask you, what was the biggest mistake that you made? Is there one that jumps? I mean, I'm sure like most leaders, you make mistakes and that's okay, right? That's where we learn. But if there was one in your leadership journey, like you look back and you went, whoa, I really missed something there, what would it be?
Well, kind of, I would say this, when you know that you have to let someone go, and I mean, I've kind of got a big heart like my dad.
Yep.
I think sometimes waiting too long to let somebody go who is not working out, or trying to find a place where they can, be repositioned in the company. There's been people that I've actually fired before and they looked right at me and go, "What took you so long? I knew I wasn't going to make it here." So I think, again, and my dad was so good when people had to let go. I mean, there were some stories where, gosh, I remember one time we had this guy, he was an employee with us for quite some time, but he just wasn't working out. And right before Christmas, he got let go. And I'll never forget, my dad called me into his office. And the reason why he called me in is I lived like a mile away from this individual.
Okay.
My dad knew that. I mean, my dad knew everybody, where they lived and everything. And so my dad calls me and he goes, "Hey, you heard we had to let, Mike go?" And I said, "Yes." And here's how good of a boss and a man my dad was. He goes, "Christmas is in 2 weeks. Mike's a good guy, but we had to let him go." And he goes, "He's not going to have a very good Christmas." And my dad hands me an envelope with a check in there. And he goes, "I want you to take this over to Mike's house and give it to him and wish him a Merry Christmas from me." I later found out there was a check for $5,000 in there from my dad.
Wow.
Now, that's the kind of employer and person that my dad was. Here he was. He let this guy go, and he totally deserved it.
Right.
But he's going, "You know what? This guy has a nice family, and he's a good man. dang, I want him to have a good Christmas, and he reaches into his pocket to help the guy out. So,
Yeah.
but I think that one lesson that I learned was, if you need to let somebody go, let them go sooner than later.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. So in our consulting company, we have a proprietary model we bring into organizations. And whenever I'm coaching or consulting CEOs, I say, you always got to think about that conference room conversation. If you hire somebody and you're not hiring them through some type of process or some type of standards, you're going to have to fire them. And behind that, there's family. Because sometimes people just don't know it's time to go, right? Like they
Yeah.
just don't know. And sometimes it's the permission. Sometimes it's they don't want to feel like they're letting anybody down. But it's that there's a family behind them mentality, right? And there's impact. So I love that your dad taught you that, and I love how he demonstrated the example of it.
Yeah, and again, I learned and my brother learned, we erred on the merciful side. When someone was let go, we would, we were generous to a fault sometimes, but they needed help, and we gave them kind of a soft landing, and I think that in the end that really will matter.
Well, and you said to err side on the default there on the air side of however you said it, but the point is that's hard, and that's what companies in a lot of aspects don't have today is hard. They're not being led by heart, and then their people are not leading and servicing and doing the things that they need to do that way as well. So let me ask you one question, and then I want to transition to the book and the things that you've learned there. If you were talking to a 20-something of your version of you today, what would you tell them? I mean, you'd probably tell them a lot of stuff based upon what we talked about in the beginning, but what would you tell them?
Boy, I would tell them, there's a lot of quotes that my dad would have these little one-liners. And I guess one of them would be, the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yeah.
And also that sometimes we all need a checkup from the neck up.
Yeah.
And then also, one of the real valuable lessons I learned from my dad, he was more than fair. He had a little saying that said, if it's not a good deal for everybody around the table, it's not a good deal. And I saw him even meeting with vendors, with banks, with other distributors. And my dad would be like, if we got the lion's share, he would be like, this isn't fair. It needs to be a good deal for everybody around the table. And I think that's why he was so fair and so good and had such great relationships with people, that they trusted him, and he was more than fair. Again, even with like the people that sold our ladders, the retailers, the distributors, and then even the suppliers. I mean, he was just very, very fair, and it had to be a good deal for everybody, which is unusual, because when you go in to negotiate, most people are like, we're going to get it all,
and win-loss.
Yeah. And so it was more of a win-win. Hey, we're going to grow, you're going to grow, and let's do this together. Let's become partners. And I know with big companies now, like the Little Giant deals with Lowe's and Costco, we go into those meetings and say, hey, we want to be long lifetime partners with you. And let's work together and both do well.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. I'm going to be transparent. I wish I would work for your company, and I wish I would have known your dad, because there was a quote, and it so hit me, Doug. It just so hit me. It was, patience is a waste of time. I love that quote. Like, that's me. I'm like, I like that quote. So go ahead.
My dad was always in a hurry. He, everything he did real fast. And that quote, one time my dad was in Europe actually on a church mission, and where I got that quote is he called me up, and I was in the office, and we were just crazy busy that day. And he goes, hey, I need this document. Can you fax it over to me? And this was in the days when, everybody faxed stuff.
Sure.
And some of the younger people are going, what's a fax machine? So I got busy and I got distracted, and my dad called me back like 10 minutes later, and he goes, he had this urgency in his voice. He goes, it's me, your dad. And I go, oh man. And he goes, I said, I'm sorry, Dad. I've been really busy. Things are going crazy here. Would you be a little patient? And he stopped and he goes, son, patience is a waste of time. Do it now. So I mean, I dropped everything. I sent it over to him, and that was one of his sayings. But he had a sense of urgency, and I mean, the guy walked fast. He drove cars fast.
Yeah.
He was always in a hurry,
Yeah.
make things
Yeah,
happen.
you know what? Maybe I'm the reincarnation, but that so much describes me, of me. So that's going up on my wall. I love it. So let's shift gears. You sell the company, right? And now you're doing some amazing things as part of your giving back to the communities, giving back to your church, and so you write this book. Talk about the book.
Yeah. So the way this book came about, my father passed away 10 years ago, and we're cleaning out his house, and I find this manuscript, and my dad was starting to write a book, and I said to my siblings, I go, wow, this is kind of cool. Dad was writing a book, and I go, yeah, I guess so. And nobody really wanted to do anything with it. And I'm like, do you guys care if I have this? I'm interested in it. And they're like, yeah, no, we were just going to throw it away.
Wow.
So I was like, okay. So it kind of sat on the shelf for a while. It was on my desk for a while, and I'd look at it every once in a while. And I started thinking about my father, and I started writing down some of his quotes, and I was thinking about some of the lessons he taught me. And I was like, this story really needs to be told. This man is a different boss than any boss or employer anybody has ever heard of or seen, or
Yeah.
I really need to tell this story. So I go to my siblings and I said, hey, I'm thinking about finishing this book. And they kind of looked at me like, and so, like I said, I ended up, retiring and doing some, serving on some boards and some mission stuff. And I started doing this book, and it took me 18 months. It was during COVID. It was, there was all these, I had to do meetings over Zoom. I had to find people. I ended up interviewing almost 40 people for this book. And what I found was I didn't know half of the things that my father did to help people. I knew a lot of the stories, but all of these stories came as I interviewed his friends, his church friends, his former employees, and colleagues, and different things like that. I found that there were all these amazing stories that had just been kind of swept under the rug, if you would, because everything he did anonymously, and so
Right.
I just found out that I had even a lot more awesome father and mentor than I even realized I had. And I was like, these stories need to be shared with the world, because this book will help anybody. If it's a couple that's struggling in their marriage, or with teenagers, or, siblings, or business people, or salespeople with their customers, any of these principles of Hal Wing, the business principles and leadership qualities of Hal Wing, the things I learned from him they apply to everything.
So, and I know this is going to be hard to put you on the spot, but if and you told an amazing story already, if there was another story that jumped out that from a leadership perspective, what would rise to the top? Was there one that would jump out?
Are you talking about a story that
Yep. For a story that you read, or you expanded on, or you got from the interviews?
Well, one thing that I really learned about my father is that he had this ability to be in the right place at the right time. And you can call it perception, you can call it a spiritual inkling, or whatever you want to call it. But throughout this book and through these stories, I found that my father was always in the right place at the right time. And there were times where he came and helped with resources. There were times where he came and helped with visits, or there were times and when people really needed his help, or there were times when he came with everything he had. And one of the really cool stories, and he gave a lot of people opportunities, which were incredible. People that maybe other companies or other people wouldn't have given opportunities, like people, ex-cons from prison, and all these people that had problems. But one of the very cool stories is I interviewed this couple that the guy came to work for us kind of later in life. And his wife was an associate she worked at a bank that my dad would go into all the time. And as I interviewed this couple at their home, I've got my camera, my phone, and I'm interviewing them. And she says to her husband, Steve, tell him about the time that Hal Wing came and visited you at the hospital. And he goes, well, your dad came and visited me at the hospital. And she goes, no, Steve, that's not what happened. So she said, let me tell the story.
Funny.
And so she said, Steve was in a really bad accident. He was working for a company, a manufacturing company, and one of the machines that he was working on, there was like it exploded. It like went into it sent shrapnel. He was operating this machine and something went wrong, and the dies and all this stuff blew up, and it sent all this shrapnel into his chest.
Oh, wow.
And a great big piece of it hit him right beneath the knee and almost cut his leg off.
Wow.
So he's in total shock. They call they call the ambulance. They rush him to the hospital. They call her. She meets him at the hospital, and he's in ICU, and they've got him on morphine. He's in shock. They're trying to stabilize him. They really want to save his leg. And she says, I'm sitting in a chair by his, the stretcher, the bed,
Sure.
holding his hand and comforting him. And she said, all of a sudden, out of the blue, your dad is in the emergency room. And she goes, I'm in shock. And she goes, Hal, how did you get in here? And he goes, that was easy. I just told him Steve was my brother.
Wow.
Have you ever tried to go into an emergency room?
Yeah, you can.
Related to somebody, and there's a guy that's almost, that's in real bad shape.
Yeah.
Try it sometime and see. But my dad worked his way and gotten into this place, right?
Right.
And she said the doctors are working on him, and that all these alarms are going off, and they're just running around. And she goes, your dad disappears for a minute, and then he comes back in the room with a washcloth with soap and water on it. She goes, nobody realized that Steve's face and his arms and hands were black.
Wow.
She goes, your dad gently washes his face and his arms and hands and leans down to his ear and said, you really are my brother. And he says, when you get out of this hospital, you will be working for me, and leaves.
Wow.
Now the story continues. Steve, his life was saved. He made it, but they did had to amputate his leg. And he went into a depression. And his wife says, the day that I pushed Steve into our house in a wheelchair, she goes, we were only in the house for 30 seconds. And the first person that called was Hal Wing. She goes, how he knew we were home, I will never know. Just like how he knew we were in the hospital, I will never know. But she says, I answer the phone. Your dad's on the phone. Is Steve there? Let me talk to him.
Wow.
He gets on the phone. He gets on the phone with Steve and says, are you ready to come work for me? And he said, Hal, I lost my leg. I can't work for you. I'm going to be on disability the rest of my life. And my dad said, you can answer the phone, can't you? He said, yes. And he goes, you're working for me in customer service, and your job's ready whenever you are. So what's really cool about this story is Steve gets a prosthetic leg, and he comes to work for Little Giant, works in customer service, does all these other odds and end jobs. And he kind of becomes Hal's little right-hand man, my dad's right-hand man. And he goes, all of a sudden, I'm working for your dad doing all these special projects. And he said, I get a phone call one day, Steve, meet me at this house. Here's the address. So he goes, I drive up, your dad's there in his car. And he says, Steve, look at that house. What do you see? And he goes, I see a house. And he goes, look closer, Steve. What do you see? And he goes, honestly, Hal, I just see a house. I see some cars. I see a house. And he goes, Steve, take a look at this guy's roof. He needs a new roof. I want you to ring his doorbell. And I want you to tell him somebody anonymously is going to replace his roof. Goodbye, and drives off. Steve's standing there and he goes, I'm going to knock on this guy's door and tell him someone's going to replace his roof. And he says, finally, I get up the gumption after 5 minutes. I ring the guy's doorbell. The guy comes to the door. Yeah, what do you want? He goes, I know you're not going to believe this, but he said, somebody wants to replace your roof, and I can't tell you who it is. Is it okay? And the guy goes, are you serious? And he goes, yes, this is for real. And he goes, well, sure. Yeah, wow, this is unbelievable. Thank you. So then Steve goes on to say, man, there was times, he goes, my dad would call him all the time and say, let's go do this. Let's take care of this person. Let's go take care of that one. There is another employee I interviewed that said he always kept a nice shirt in his office because he goes, over 200 times I went on one of these little missions for your dad to help people.
Wow.
And every time it was anonymous. So incredible man.
Oh
And
my.
he would use his employees and they would go and do all these things to help people. It was just incredible.
So, as I'm listening to all this, and I can't wait to read the book, where do you think your dad learned all that, or where did he get? I mean, there had to be something in his journey that somebody impacted him or something. Has that ever come up?
I know where it came from, and it came from his parents. Yeah, as I interviewed his last remaining sibling, my aunt,
Okay.
and other people, my grandmother used to go over. Now, keep in mind, my grandma and grandpa had 5 siblings, and
Okay.
my grandpa was a foreman on the railroad, and in his spare time, he farmed 11 acres, and it was immaculate. So
Wow.
he got the work ethic from my grandpa, and he said, my dad said he got his self-belief from my grandmother. But my grandma would go every night over to the neighbor's house. They had a crippled lady that lived next door, and my grandma would go over there and bathe her and get her ready for bed and everything. So I know that he got those things from his parents. Yeah.
Yeah. Servant leadership, and it starts at home, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just wow. Oh my gosh, Doug, we could probably talk for hours. I mean, I probably need to have you back. And after I read the book, and we can go into more details on those stories.
Anytime. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, wow, just wow. It's just amazing. And to think that this all started, and not to downplay, but it started with a ladder, right? I mean,
It started with one person, my dad, and he gave up a very good job to do this dream. He said, I wanted to work with my sons. I never did this to get rich.
yeah,
And I just wanted to work with my sons, and everything
yeah.
else, everything else just fell into place because he was such a good person. He was such a hard worker, and he just wanted to help people and give people opportunities.
Well, and like I shared with you, my daughter works in our business, and I just think about some of the things you just shared, and I'm like, I've got work to do. I definitely have work to do. So let's shift gears. Tell me the best advice you've ever been given by anyone, whether it's business or life, personal. Best advice you've ever been given.
I would say it was from my father. Two things. He said, you can tell anybody anything, and he was specifically talking about customers. You can tell customers anything you want to, as long as it's the truth.
Wow.
And I thought that was really, really great. And then the other one is that he would say all the time is, don't lie, don't steal, and don't be lazy.
Yeah, pretty powerful.
And so I think those are the things I really, and then you're never a loser until you quit. And my father was, man, he was competitive. In the beginning, the 2 brothers from the largest ladder company in the world, the Werner Ladder Company, came up to my dad and they said, Wing, you are a fool. You're an idiot. You are going to fail. We could have had this ladder years ago. No one's going to buy these ladders. And my dad said that day, that was my fuel, right?
Yeah.
And what's really funny is those guys tried to buy our company 4 times during the time that we had it, and my dad would never sell to them. And they would come in with some ridiculous offer, and my dad had this really quick wit. And one time they came in and they said, they made an offer, and he goes, you guys don't want to buy me, you guys just want to own me.
Oh, I love it.
And and he refused. He was just so, but and then here's the thing. Years later, one of those Warner brothers, they had since retired. They lived in West Palm Beach, Florida, really nice. And I was doing a huge show down there. And lo and behold, guess who comes by our booth? One of the brothers. And by then he was probably close to 80.
Okay.
And he said, can I tell you something? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I had so much respect for your father. And he goes, he was incredible. He goes, nobody thought he was going to do anything, and what he did was just unbelievable. And he said, I will deny this if you ever tell anybody, because the only ladder I have at my house is a little giant.
Isn't that great? What a great
It
story.
was and I was like, man, that is such a cool story. And
Yeah.
and it was one of the Warner Brothers. Yeah, it was really cool.
I mean, it just goes to the fact that don't listen to other people, because they'll always attempt to limit you to do things because they don't see that power in themselves, so to speak. Let's flip it upside down. What's the worst advice that you ever been given that hopefully you didn't follow? And if you did, what did you learn?
Well, I'll tell you this, because it was from my ex-wife. And it's not bad or anything. When I was married to her for, oh man, almost 25 years. And so a lot of that was when I was at Little Giant. And she wasn't happy with like my progress in the company. She thought it was too slow. She thought, your brother's getting more responsibility than you are, and he makes more than you. And, she goes, I think you should quit and we should move out of state and go get a different job. And I thought about it for a few minutes, not very long, but I knew that it was the wrong thing to do. So I didn't do it. And, there's an old saying my dad used to say, when mama's not happy, no one's happy.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's that right there. I'm so grateful that I didn't do that, because I worked my dad was really smart. He didn't just give us positions. Man, we had to earn them. We had to learn. He had us learn every position in the company, starting with cleaning bathrooms and sweeping floors, and then manufacturing, and working your way up through the process, and customer service and sales and management. And finally, you're one of the owners of the business, and you have the majority of the company, and me and my brother. And I look back on it now, and I'm like, my dad was so smart. He was so smart, because he taught us well. He taught us how to treat people, but we learned every part of the business and appreciated everyone that worked for us. And so I'm very grateful that I didn't take that advice.
Yeah.
It ended up working out perfectly well for me. And had a wonderful career, and just wouldn't change that for anything. Yeah, it was great.
Good for you. Well, so Doug, I'm going to ask you to give us a final thought. I'm going to do a little housekeeping here. So, folks, we so appreciate your support, and we wouldn't do this without you. We actually do it for you to contribute back, and we have some amazing guests like Doug and the other folks we've interviewed over the last 2 years. You can go and get the recent episodes at www.thesuccessascent.com. We're at all the major podcast sources, Apple, Spotify, you name it, we're there. So we love your support. Subscribe, follow, give us ratings, feedback, all those great things that you do. So Doug, take us out. I'd love to have a final thought from you on what you would share with people as we end our episode.
Well, Pat, I sure appreciate this opportunity. And I would say this, on the building, on the Little Giant corporate building, to this day, there is a quote that is screwed right. It's on a big plaque, and it's screwed right into the building. A quote from Hal Wing, where he says this: if you concentrate on building the business and not the man, you will not succeed. But if you concentrate on building the man, you achieve both. And so really, Hal Wing built people, and those people helped him build ladders. And so I think that's the greatest lesson that I learned from Little Giant. Zig Ziglar says it this way: you can get anything you want, or you can have anything in life that you want, as long as you help enough other people get what they want. And that really was the philosophy of Hal Wing. Build people and the rest will come. And it did come. And it was just an unbelievable career. It was an unbelievable story about Hal Wing. There's so many other stories in this book where he takes people that nobody would take, and he mentors them and builds them. I mean, the current CEO of Little Giant, Ryan Moss, has been there over 30 years.
Okay.
He does not have one day of college. He started out running punch presses, and now he's the CEO of the company. So Hal had this unique vision of seeing people and not seeing them what they were currently, but what they could become. And then he mentored them, and they became these huge successes, giants, right? They became giants. And then they in turn took the company. And Ryan Moss, I interviewed him for my book, and he said, this is one of my favorite quotes. He said, "Hal Wing planted the trees, and now we all get to enjoy the shade."
Mm. Wow. I cannot, as soon as we're hanging up here, I'm getting Amazon to ship me that book tomorrow so I can start reading it. So Doug, I'm scrolling right now. If people want to get the book, they can go to dougwing.com. And then also you have a website, giantsuccess.com. What are they going to get when they go to Giant Success?
Well, when they go to Giant Success, they can, what I'm doing right now is that is a place where they can, if they want a signed copy of the book, either in hardback or paperback, they can get that. And then also I've been doing more speaking now for companies and doing presentations. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'll be, it's pretty exciting. Like the message that we have of building people goes so many places. For example, one of the presentations I'm going to be doing in Utah in a couple of weeks is to an elementary school.
Oh my gosh.
And to teach kids how they can become giant successes, right, in life. And, really the premise is help people more, love people more, and build people more, or mentor people. And so I'm going to be doing a presentation. I go to, corporations and do this presentation, and I'm also going to be, when I'm in Utah, I'm actually giving this same presentation on a different level to one of the largest police departments in the state in Salt Lake, right there in Utah. And so anybody that's doing anything, whether you're in law enforcement or business or schools or whatever you do, families, you can take these principles of this book and really apply them to your life. And so I do a little bit of speaking right now, and people can get a hold of me, through Giant Success as well. Awesome. And get books and more information. But it's interesting. One door opens and one door closes, another door opens. And when I retired, I was like, what am I going to do? And then I got into this book, and I was like, this is kind of cool. I'm glad I did this.
Yeah.
A couple months ago, I had dinner with Mark Victor Hansen, who is a co-creator of the Chicken Soup for the Soul. And I told him some of these stories, and he looks at me and he's like, I want to sign you to a 3-year publishing contract to write more books. And I was like, you do?
That's great.
I was like, wow. And, here's the thing that's wonderful about this is not only am I, helping other people, but as an individual, I'm growing now.
Yeah.
And I'm expanding my abilities and my talents, which I never knew I had. And so it's really interesting how that works,
It is so cool.
I'm able to bless and help other people, but then it's making me better as well. So I'm so happy about that.
Well, think about it. If you were still at the company, you'd be building amazing ladders and you'd be impacting people. And now you're building ladders and impacting people well beyond the borders or the walls of the building. So, well, Doug, you know what? Amazing. And it was so good that we went over, and yet there was so much content. I just can't thank you enough. And I just appreciate everything that you brought to the table today and everything you're going to continue to do. So thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure. Nice to meet you. And I love doing this. I just love it. And, anything we can do to help people grow and to build themselves and become a success is great.
Yeah, you certainly showed. You say it comes from the heart, I can tell. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. As we end every show, be happy, be healthy, be safe until the next time we talk. Take care, everyone.